This week here on Mastering Dungeons, our main topic is going to be teaching a new generation about role-playing games. So we're going to do four different sections here, but I want to start by saying last week our main topic was rules like create characters in games, which led to further discussions, both in the show and later. And then we came to the topic of teaching players and game masters and what is a rules role in that teaching.
Yeah.
So this week we want to talk about tips for teaching the game to new players, tips for teaching new game masters, instructing them, whether you're teaching them yourself or you are writing rules to teach them, and ways to go about that. Any thoughts before we dig into more specific topics, Teos?
I mean, I love this topic. It is something I think about a lot when I see lots of new players coming in. And twice a year, I've been at conventions where there are tons and tons of new or infrequent players, right? Casual players that maybe played 2 years ago or something like that, or played back with second edition. They want to try it again. And it can be any type of situation, right? It can be like a dad and a kid where the daughter says, I play all the time, but my dad has never tried.
Yeah.
Can we sit down so that he can learn the game? Or it can be the other way around, right? It can be the dad saying, hey, I've always wanted to show my daughter this game. Do you have something that helps us with that? And so that learn to play format and that goal of trying to teach for your first time is great. And I see all kinds, right? I see eager people, and I see people that, I will say, hey, do you want to try D&D? And they go, oh, well, I don't know that I could do that. I'm anxious just thinking about the prospect of this. And then we'll, have them talk to the DM. If they're sitting and just watching, but then they start playing and then off we go. And seeing how DMs handle that, how they actually get to show the game to someone who's maybe very nervous about learning is really cool.
Yep. The first topic I wanted to discuss is how we, as in Teos and I, learned how to play D&D, and then from those experiences, think of some tips or some stumbling blocks or something like that. Because I think the way we interact with the game, the way we teach others how to play, the way we ourselves become dungeon masters or game masters often goes back to those earliest experiences because they are the ones that resonate the most with us. So, a little origin story time. Teos, when and how and where did you
Yeah.
learn how to play D&D?
So my mom told me there was a D&D club and that it was some sort of fantasy game. Sounded fun, sounded up my alley. And I think she was like, you can make some better friends. And so I showed up. I was incredibly nervous, like, who are these guys? And they were older. They're generally a year older. And sat down. My DM was Michael Howler, and he was great. And all the players, and we just started playing through these now classic adventures. And as I started seeing what this involved, I thought, oh yeah, I want to be the DM. And so I would borrow whatever I could from them, and it might be even something not particular. Like, I think one of the first things I borrowed was like a monster manual. And then I went to my neighborhood in Cali, Colombia, where I lived, and I would run in Spanish for the players there, the people on my block, and just figure things out. And we would use, action figures and I think books as making dungeon walls and you name it, right? It was just complete improv of figuring it out. And I wouldn't even have all the rules. Or I would have like a basic set, but then something from AD&D, and just, it could be anything. And I just kept trying to iterate and get better over the years. How about you?
Yeah, similar story. I was 9 or 10, so I, way preteen, and it's hazy, but I reached out to some of the people that were there because I
Oh,
remembered some of them and said, I think you were there the first time I ever played D&D. And I tried to sort of remember where I remembered where it was, and I remembered the adventure that we were ended up playing. It was White Plume Mountain.
Nice.
Because I remember just enough details to piece together, oh, the Nix and Knox, the two Efreet, I think.
Uh-huh.
Uh, so okay, that's got to be that adventure. And so we started trying to put together our memories, and it was older folks. I was in elementary school; they were in middle
Mhm.
school, and so it was like, "Ooh, I get to play with the older kids." And so the first experience was just enthralling for all the reasons. And
Yeah.
I know I was playing a thief, but I can't remember the details of it. I remember arguments, a lot of arguments about rules, and so, but it was just like I was there. My soul was completely enthralled with what was happening. And so a couple of years later, I got to play more with some of the same folks, some of the other folks. But that's when the understanding started to show up.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And like you said, it's I know we weren't playing with the rules the way that they were meant to be played with. I know we were piecing things together. I know we were making things up as we went along. But that was all just a huge part of the process.
Yeah.
It didn't matter that we didn't know the rules.
Right.
It as long as we all agreed that this was the way it would be, then that's how it
Yeah.
would be.
Hmm.
And that was a huge hallmark of D&D slash AD&D, way back when. There was not this you're playing wrong.
Right.
It was you're playing.
Yeah.
And
Every
the rules were unclear, and that was a benefit, not a
yeah.
drawback in a lot of cases.
Every time our
And
group would
yeah,
meet up with another group, there would be this
yeah,
like, wait, what are you doing? Well, the blah rule. Is that how that works? I thought it worked this way. And then we would all emerge with whatever we had now decided was the new truth because we'd never
yeah,
realized it could be interpreted another way. And it was
yep,
always so fascinating. And then, a month later, you couldn't remember that you did it a different way.
right. Precisely, precisely. So, house rules needed to be there
Hmm.
to smooth over some very rough edges that might have been in the rules, might not have been in the rules, might have been
Hmm.
incorrectly in the rules, might have been contradictory within the rules themselves.
Yeah.
So you just sort of did it. And it's what's most important is the experience. What's most important is
Mm.
that you were doing the thing that drew your attention, which meant the things that might not have drawn your attention, you were more able to palate.
Yeah.
Right. They became more palatable to do these things because it's part of the game, but we do that and then we can get to the cool stuff that we love.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part when we talk about what is someone's first experience, which goes back to then how do you teach? Thinking about their first experience can be helpful. And
Mhm.
we'll talk a lot about this in this piece, but something that I've seen many times is a horrible first time.
Mhm.
Um, that includes things like adventure design. So I remember there was a fight once in third edition that was just it was like two creatures that were just so they constantly were confusing us and nothing could get done and it was very frustrating and the DM was not doing a great job of helping us with it and it was just super too much for our levels and we were just level 1 and I didn't know this at the time but when the adventure ended this couple said all right we had wanted to try this game but we're never playing this game again, this was terrible. I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
that was your first time. Oh,
Yeah.
that was a brutal first time experience. And I've seen that
Mhm.
since then in other various ways where somebody has a first time that's just so frustrating, or you watch the DM kind of doing their own thing instead of involving players, right? All those things that make for a bad
Yeah.
experience. And you just go, oh, we just lost somebody who could have been in our great hobby.
Yeah. And so that's why it's important to know when someone is learning the game so you can tailor that experience. And it's important that even if you don't know the person, even if you ask them three questions,
Mm-hmm.
what's your favorite genre of story?
Right.
Right. If they say horror, in your brain, you can, okay, I'm going to adjust this a little bit to add some uncertainty,
Yeah.
add some mystery, right? If they say sci-fi, maybe I spice it up a little bit. Maybe I add something that a
Mm-hmm.
sci-fi fan would love. Oh, your favorite movie, Star Wars? We're gonna have
Yeah.
some heroic or swinging on a
Right.
rope, or that
Yeah.
just anything to help you move it in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
And any more lessons from your early play that resonate through your experiences with learning, teaching, running games, etc.
I mean, one thing that was really helpful is just my DM always, my first DM was very open to, if you'd like to run, that's totally cool too. So
Mhm.
it wasn't like, no, this is my ego here and this is just my job. It was, yeah, you want to learn anything, you want to borrow the books, absolutely. And that was really welcoming. It reminds me of the first time D&D Encounters was out there for the Undermountain adventure that was out. And we're running D&D at a game store, 4th edition. And it's a really fun table, and these players were having a blast. And two of them at the end are like, "Could we ever DM?" And it was their first time playing, right? And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Yeah." They're like, "Great. When can we start?" Well, you might want to play a little more, but whenever you want
Yeah.
to, really, like, and we'll,
Right.
and before you knew it, they were, running tables because
Yeah.
they just had that enthusiasm for it, I was absolutely wanted to help them with that. And yeah, and they even ended up, one of them ended up running for like Wizards of the Coast staff and all kind. It's just
Oh,
a
nice.
lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing I would add is if you know you're running for new players, really think about the experience that you want them to have.
Mm.
And I'm not just talking about the characters and the adventure. I'm talking about like dice
Yeah.
and accessories and that sort of thing, because those things might draw people or those things might take away from the experience. If you're
Yeah.
fiddling with
Mm.
terrain, that
Yeah.
might really enhance the experience and it might put them in there. Or it might be you spending 20 minutes arranging material that they're not playing.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
think about the positives and the negatives for all of these different experiences and what your presentation means to that experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So the
Absolutely.
second question is, how has the game or teaching the game changed over the years? What do you have in this area, Teos?
Yeah, I think a good question I find myself wondering with this topic is whether it's easier or harder in the information age. Like you and I talked about all this, we didn't know what we were doing, and then you'd meet another group and you'd pick up something up. I think it was years before I understood why some things had like inches versus yard markers, and
Mhm.
figuring out like, oh, spells have an outdoor range versus an indoor range in AD&D.
Yeah.
I played for years when we just didn't understand it, and we just ignored it. We had no idea.
Yeah.
And these days, there's that expectation of sort of the answers out there, and you're an idiot if you don't figure it out, right? That can be a
Mhm.
way to feel about it. Like, oh, since all the information is out there, and since I can see all these DMs that are running online doing such a good job, I should be able to be mistake free, which is not true, right? And that I should say have the perfect system for overland travel and the perfect way to handle NPCs, and I should know how to do voices. And that's not true at all, right? And maybe it was a little easier before to not feel that way because you didn't have all of that information out there, right? And in the same way
Mhm.
that you might be able to solve how to fix your you know plumbing problem, but you don't have to become a plumber as a homeowner, right? Like maybe you fix the one thing, that's fine, but and that's what the internet can do for you. But don't feel like you are going to be, Matt Mercer, Chris Perkins, whoever, or even just that you'll immediately be great in some value of great that's like held by the internet, right? Instead of saying there are tools out there I can use to improve, but this is a learning process. And so that has changed a lot over the years, right? The expectation of how quickly you can ascend.
Yep. And I'm going to switch that on its ear a bit and talk about UDMing for players
Mm,
who are imperfect.
mm,
And this is again, know your players. You're DMing and the player does something that their character should not be able to do. They use a spell in a way that shouldn't be usable that way. They try to do this other thing that
yeah.
isn't isn't not covered by the rules, but is against the rules.
Yeah. I bounced this spell off of the wall
Right.
so that it goes around the
And
corner.
so there is a huge question that you should ask yourself as a game master. And that's, do I correct them? Do I let this happen? Or something in between? And there is no right answer.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem. The right answer depends on everyone at the table. If this is a group where 5 of the 6 players want to learn the rules and they're there and they're discussing it and they've got their players handbooks out and they're obviously trying to learn, you don't want to just ignore the fact that this, breaks the rules, but you're going to allow it anyway.
Yeah.
So you could say, that's a great idea. The rules don't allow that. Now there's another question. Is it, do you allow it right now?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you
Like require a check?
instruct them to, in this case, you can't do it. But if you moved here and did it, then it would be fine.
Yeah.
So it's again, it might be totally right to do that. It might be totally wrong to do that, depending on the situation and the players and everything else happening around it. So do not require perfection, but
Mm-hmm.
understand where there's a teachable moment that will add to the experience versus just being the rules lawyer who says, no, you can't do that, pick something else.
Yeah.
So that's why this topic is so fascinating to me,
Yeah.
because there are no right answers.
And editions after first, I can't think of good example. Well, even first had, I guess, like the where basic had like the B1 adventure, right? Where you like as
Yeah.
DM were encouraged to add things like here's a room,
Yeah.
and here's a list
Uh-huh.
of treasure over there. So what do you want to be there? It's not perfect, but it's at least trying to say, hey, don't worry, you make this up.
Yeah.
So some people loved B1 and some people did not because it was very incomplete, depending on how you
Yeah.
looked at it, or maybe that was the feature. But editions, especially after first, tried to have starter sets, tried to have introductory adventures, specifically for new DMs or for new players. What I haven't found is that there's a real body of like an academic discipline, right? Of creating a new player
Yeah.
experience and refining like that. We have not had that in our hobby. And so you can find disparate events where, third edition organized play was a way that you could sort of have standardized play. So you didn't have to worry about your DM's house rules, which might be quite onerous, and they often were in that era. And you could create community and now exchange all this information, learn a lot. Fourth edition had the D&D Encounters program that I mentioned, and the website store locator was pretty good because of the way the WPN Windows Play Network program tied into stores. They wanted to keep it up to date, so the chances that when you called that store, they were running encounters was pretty high. After a while, that wasn't true anymore, and it's not true today. But back then, that store locator was amazing, and you could go there, and even if you were a DM, it was, you're just going to run this one page today. Right? That's really simple. So easy to prep. So it's so easy to become a DM and run this. And everything was kind of drag and drop almost, right? Drag it off the page onto your table because it was so easy to run. And they gave you the maps and sometimes even the minis. So that made it great. And the players could know, I can just drop in and play, and I can just join this table this week and maybe another one the next week. So it's really easy for me to come in. Lots of people would do that. Fifth edition has not had a strong store program, but it's had more convention learn to play events, both
Mhm.
through Baldwin Games and just in other places. But not just for D&D. An interesting test is, go into a convention one year to whatever the room is for a thing and look at those people or play a game and note who's at your table. Next year, is it the same people?
Mhm.
And at some conventions for some games, it really is, Like
Yeah.
you go to that Savage World table and it's like, oh, it's the same people playing Savage Worlds this year as last year. Well, that's great for the hardcore fans, but it means you're not really teaching to new players, right? You've not managed to crack the code on attracting new players and making it friendly for them because they're not there, right? Other places you go to and you just see they really know how to do that. They
Mhm.
are really in the business of teaching to new players, and they've got that, and they're really, new player welcome type sign that's available. The more that energy is devoted to that, then that is a better program, and you're making that space available.
Yeah, and what you just said brings to mind again this idea of there's no one best way to teach,
Mm-hmm.
because even if you as a game company, whether it's Wizards of the Coast or somebody else making a different game, create a packet, create a box that you send to a game store. Here is the perfect way to teach our game, and the store gets it, and they might give it to an employee or give it to a regular who runs games there, and they may look at it and go, "That's not how you teach games. I know
Mm-hmm.
better. I know better how to teach games." And in some cases, they may be right, and in some cases, they may be wrong. But it's that connection from the creator to the
Yeah.
community to the audience, that that's several steps where
Yeah.
miscommunication and opinions and biases can come to the fore.
Yeah. I mean, and product wise, right? Like Lost Mine of Fandelver is a lot better than other
Yeah,
intro box set experiences, but it still doesn't tell you like how to run the part where you get to the town, or
yeah,
we talked about a couple of weeks ago, right? When the goblins
yeah,
attack you, what to do with that? Like,
yeah,
it doesn't handhold you. It doesn't say, "Hey DM, here's what's going on in this scene." We know this is your first time. I'm
yeah.
curious whether the new starter set will devote time to that. It's clearly worked on character generation, but will it do that kind of hand holding? And someone on our Discord asked, which fifth edition official adventure is
Mhm.
the easiest to run?
Yeah.
I
That's the question
don't.
for next week. but but preview,
Yeah.
we don't know. It's
Right? Like,
it's it's I don't know if it was you or I or Chris and I who covered all of the,
yeah, you and I
like,
did that. The intros.
the
Yeah.
first encounters
Yeah.
of each of these adventures and what they
Yeah.
meant. And I'll have to go back and listen to that to see what I
Yeah.
said,
It was
because
rough.
probably my opinion is different now than it was then.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it would be interesting to see, because we'll
Yeah.
cover that next week
Yeah. Yeah.
in the
We'll talk about it
question.
more. But that idea, right, of how do you create, even with your official products, a
Yeah.
solid first couple of sessions, right?
Yep. All
And I
right. So
think the
based
answer,
on,
we know that the answer is you put 26 NPCs in a cell with you.
yeah, that's not it. Uh, well, the one other thing I'm going to add about the changes of editions is, as
Mm.
you said, Teos, as the editions have changed, the rules have become clearer. It has become easier to understand, and the tools that we have to teach the game have become more complex in both a good and a bad way. Right? We have the internet, we have uh, smartphones, we have maps that we can print, we have minis that we can print,
Yep.
we have terrain that we can print. We can do all of these things. But just because it's become easier does not mean it's become easy.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
In fact, the more elements you put in, the more complicated it becomes. Sometimes the harder it is to find the best way to teach.
Yeah. Yeah.
So with that in mind, the next topic we want to talk about are tips for teaching new players. And we've talked about this tangentially a few times and maybe even directly once or twice. But let's throw out some tips there as we decide we want this game to grow, assuming we do. How do we do
Hmm.
that? All right. So, what are some of your tips, Teos?
I mean, one is don't jump into character creation, kind of any game, but fifth edition included, right? It's just way too complicated. I like, our book. We had Jamie Madigan on our show to talk about the psychology of Dungeons and Dragons, the book that I'm holding up right now. And he has a great part where in chapter 12, he talks about, or chapter 11, I think it is. He talks, chapter 10, I'm making it all up. But he lists the number of options that players have to deal with, right? Uh, so it's like 117 subclasses, 13 classes, um, you know, 49 species if you include Monster of the Multiverse, right? Just like all these
Mhm.
amazing numbers of options that would just take you forever. And I've helped a number of times, like not, I think it was 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I helped someone's younger brother create a druid just with the player's handbook. It took us so long.
Yeah.
I mean, because they were not the kind of person that was willing. And Jamie talks about the psychology of this too. Like some people see an option, good enough, done, and other people keep going, right? And he was definitely the keep
Yeah.
going. Like, okay, that's possible, but let's see what else there is. So we looked at every spell and we looked at every species and everything, and it just took forever, and it was quite confusing. And at the end of it, I did not feel like in the time we had, he felt super confident about his character, right? He had not
Right.
learned a lot about his character because that
Right.
process was so convoluted. And so
Yeah.
I would generally say anytime you're teaching new players, skip character creation. Use
Yeah.
great pregens that you have carefully chosen because they're easy to read. So one of the things I would not do is use the typical character sheet, because the
Mhm.
typical character sheet looks so dense with all of its information. It really confuses you. Um, it may be complete, and once you know it, it might be helpful, but I would use a completely non-standard pregen, something that you think is really obvious, easy to use, and you need to have all that spell information on it too if they are spellcasters, because that will teach you your true options. The ideal pregen sheet groups things together, right? All the skills are here,
Mhm.
all the attacks are here, all the spells are here, your class features are here, so that you can easily make those decisions as to what to do. And when you're teaching the game, you can say, hey, what we're going to do right now is called a skill check. You'll
Yeah.
find that right here on your sheet. Oh, okay. And everybody looks at that part and forgets all the rest of this sheet, right? So they can just zero in on there. And now we're going to make an attack roll against thing that's coming at you. You're going to look here. That shows all your attack actions, including your spell casting, at wills and
Yeah.
maybe a couple of other things. And now you can easily do that.
In honor of Tax Day, which is tomorrow as of this recording or yesterday
Uh-huh.
as of the release, I have had conversations with people about the character sheets.
Mm,
And, especially players who are familiar with it. And they're like, although the character sheet's fine, the character sheet's not that bad. And what I like to say to them is imagine instead of getting this sheet put in front of you as a game aid, all right, we're going to talk about your taxes. Here's the sheet you need to fill out. Uh, oh, you don't know about any of these things? Okay, well, there are 27 sections with, five different things, and you're going to have to move numbers all around. So just pretend, instead of a game, pretend this is your tax form that you
uh,
need to fill out. How would you feel if that was thrown in
mhm.
front of you and you're told you have an hour to fill that out, to figure out, your
Yeah.
taxes? And, you know, a tax form can be pretty complicated for people, and it's
Yeah.
streamlined as much as possible in many cases. So just imagine that. That's what new players are dealing with when a blank character sheet is set in front of them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's too much. A different game, it might not be, right? So Shadow Dark, for example,
Mhm.
your character is really easy to make. And they're
Mhm.
almost, they're just a few key choices. So that's a
Yeah.
case where going through role playing creation or character creation with your party for
Mhm.
Shadow Dark of new players can actually be fine because it's
Mhm.
so simple that you will learn who your character is and make some
Right.
choices and figure things out. so that it'll be fun. And that's worthwhile. And I think that's the idea. A lot of us grew up with older, easier, simpler editions where you could make a character in 10 minutes. And so it wasn't a big deal to do character creation. And you could argue, am I better with it or not? Well, it was a little more arguable. Now, I would never, ever, ever recommend that someone start with character creation, because unless you're just going to devote an entire session to it one-on-one with one player, because you have to have a player's handbook for everybody, and just one person, the rogue's going to be done really quickly, the druid will take forever, and just no.
And yeah, Teos, you said that in Shadow Dark character creation's easy. I will push back on that and say it's easier than D&D, but for some people that's not going to be easy at all.
Sure.
Right? For some people, any choice will not be easy.
That is true.
And that's what, even a name, right? You could give them a complete character sheet, very simple, everything filled out, and you say, please choose a name for your character. And a half hour later, they're still not quite sure, right? So Teos's, do not make them create a character is certainly well taken, which folds into mine, which is something I said earlier. Learn about your players and their interests beforehand if you have the means to do so, and focus on ways to hit the interest points ahead of any non-interest point. So maybe do a little bit of character creation if you know that the people who you're playing with are interested in customizing a character. And even then, I would say fill in most of the character sheet, but maybe give them 4 choices, right? Choose not your species, origin, class, but choose this weapon or this weapon. The difference is negligible, but there you go. You get to at least make one choice between 2 options.
Yeah.
That might empower them, but again, only if it's those types of players. If it's anyone else, don't.
And I think that's sort of, what we want to do when we're talking about that is that idea of giving a player a little bit of option. But they have a little bit of option just in which character they take. And I think one of the things with like pre-gens is to make it clear, this is the fighter who is an archer. So they will attack from afar, and they're good at, this kind of stuff. And here is the sword and board fighter. He has a shield and he has a sword, and he goes right up into danger, and his goal is to do this and that and the other. Like, one of the things I loved about those Acquisitions Incorporated characters that were used for a sort of orientation activity at PAX West, they were meant to be funny, but in an attempt to be funny, they actually were really useful at saying what the character does. And so it'd say things like, for the fighter, get up there on the enemy. It's your job to take the hits, right? And it was meant to be sort of hilarious, but it was actually really informative, right? And the rogue would have almost the opposite advice. Your job is to steal the thing that matters, disarm the trap before it blows up on everyone, and look cool doing it, right? And it's like, oh yeah, I'm just making up those descriptions. But that kind of tagline is really helpful for your players to pick that right character for who they're going to be, right?
Yeah. One of my biggest pieces of advice is, if you have a choice between trying to do too much or too little, always go with too little. Too little will leave them wanting more, hopefully, if the session goes well. Too long will make them question whether they want to come back for more. So, pushing the limits is fine in certain areas, but leisure fun is not one of those times where you want to push someone to their limit.
No, true. Yeah. Another big thing I think of is longevity. And this is something that almost every convention store fails at, which is to say, except for the D&D Encounters program, that was very good about it. But, we might give someone a demo game, a new player experience, and then we say, thanks a lot, take care. But did we give them something that leads them to the websites where they'll find community? Do we know, how are they going to get their next game, right? And that's something that's really important. It's what D&D Encounters did so well, was say, and the next room we'll get to next week. Come back and play, right? That was great. And your community's right here at this store. And, now you can go look at the shelves and you know what this game's about. And it was really great. Like when Dark Sun came out for an encounter season, you could see people stand up after the game, go over to the shelf, buy the 4E Dark Sun materials, and go to the cash register, right? Because it was like,
Yep.
yeah, this world's really new and interesting, and I want to learn more, and maybe I'll make my own character or whatever, right? That was really great.
Yep. My last bit of advice on these lines is don't try to teach everything all at once. As excited as you might be to show off the breadth and the depth of what D&D
Mm,
can be, it's better to focus on one thing and do it really well
yeah.
than try to show everything. So
Mm,
if your group are storytellers and you're excited about the combat system, save the combat system for at the end of the session or the next session.
mm,
In this first session, give them the chance to make connections, give them the chance to tell a story, give them a chance to act out a part or make an important decision in the game rather than getting them into this other part of the game right now.
totally. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. And the final thing I want to talk about is tips for teaching new dungeon masters. This game runs on the back of volunteers, whether they're paid or not, to uh, to run the game for folks and be the interpreter of the rules and being the presenter of the story. So, what are we thinking when we try to come up with ways to teach DMs, Teos?
I mean, this is tough. I think we do a real disservice to DMs and GMs across pretty much all RPGs, right? We don't create introductory adventures for the DM almost
Mhm.
ever. We don't tell DMs, most games do not tell DMs how to find their own style and approach. We assume that there is one standard you must hit and it must be done perfectly. And people who publish guides are often like, this is the way you do it,
Mhm.
instead of
Yeah.
find your approach, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it's often done in an approach that's like, here are the 9 steps you must follow, but it doesn't really tell you why, right? Even the player's handbook and the DMG, I feel like they say do this, but they don't exactly tell you the why of, right? And every section, like the trap section, here's how to make a trap, but they don't say what's the point of a trap in a scene.
Mhm.
Is it gotcha? Is it damage? Is it challenge? Like, what's the point of it? And it doesn't walk you through that, right? And so there's actually very, very little that talks to DMs. And so my first thing that I go to is we need to start actually talking to our DMs and providing them good advice. There's some of that there. I think technique wise, the why is something you find in Mike Shea's Lazy DM series, right? He
Mhm.
will explain why these 4 steps are recommended or 7 steps or whichever, depending which part of the book you're reading. And
Mhm.
and what it is that you're trying to achieve with them, because hey, you might find another way to do it, right? Adventure wise, it would be great if each encounter or scene taught what the point of it is, right? Like, this is a goblin ambush on the road. What's the point of this? What's expected in this scene? What fun things, where is the fun coming from? How can you lean into that? What fun can you bring to this, right? um One of the best things that I like from Jason Alexander's So You Want to Be a Game Master book is when he talks about his sample adventure, he does that. Every one of those scenes, he's saying, here's why these things are in the room. This is what they're doing. Here's what you can do with them, plus other things you might come up with. And that's great advice.
Yeah. And that sort of plays into my advice, which is also an old saying in the medical profession, talking about different procedures you could do, which is watch one, do one, teach one. So the first thing you should do is encourage new DMs to play the game with different DMs. So you're watching other folks,
Yes.
picking up on the elements that they present, whether positively or negatively, seeing different styles, seeing the way the players react, seeing how you react
Mm.
to those. Then run one. So then you start running a game, run with different players, run with experienced players, run with new
Mm.
players. Get in the wide breadth of styles that you've observed into your games to see what works, what resonates, and what doesn't. And then teach it. Then start explaining your process to other DMs because as you break down this explanation to them, you will be learning about your own process and learning new things that you've now taken the time to think about.
Yeah.
Uh, and you could do that at a convention, you could do that at a game store, you could do that with a couple different groups of friends to get that different experience from as a player, as a game master, and then as an instructor.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It, often we have this question that comes up every time I'm doing one of these new player conventions. Someone comes up and says, and it's just a few people each time, but it happens every time. Hey, I'm a new DM. Do you have anything for me? And the first time it was like thinking, but now we're ready. And what we'll say is, sort of. What we would invite you to do is come sit at this table and
Mm-hmm.
watch our DM teach the new players. You can
Yep.
play if you want to as part of it, but sit next to them. Feel free to afterwards chat with them and ask them questions. And by the way, the adventure they're running is available online, so you can go back and see what did they do with what was there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they've come back and said that was actually really helpful, right? Seeing
Yeah.
what they did, how they approached it, that was really useful. Now, even better would be if we had an actual DM boot camp, but
Right.
that actually when you put it in that lens, it's been really useful for player or for DM want to be's to sit down and see that.
And you and I have talked about this forever, which is we need a video series where
Yeah.
it's a DM running the game, the DM's running the game, and then they stop and they turn to the camera and they say, I just did this. This is why. I could have done this,
Yeah.
but I chose not to do this because the adventure didn't call for it, or I felt that the time wasn't right, right? And then you
Yeah.
turn
Have
back
that
and they
aside.
run the game again, and
Yeah.
then they turn to the camera again. And that for me would be so informative and so interesting. And
Yeah.
I haven't really seen a video that does that over a long period of time.
Yeah, that's kind of where I came from with my trap series that I did at
Yeah.
Gamehole Con, and this year I'm going to do one for exploration. And
Yeah.
it's that idea of play, and then let's talk a bit about why, as DM or designer, I did this. What's the point of it? What other alternatives are? And it's fun to say, like, to folks, like, what do you guys think? What other traps could be here, right? And then we'll talk about what else could be here and what we'd like, or what surprised you, and that's neat, right? To just take down the scaffolding and say,
Mhm.
let's poke at this. Let's think about what's here. Um, that would be great, right? More of that would really be useful. I always especially like the concept of take an adventure, have four DMs run it, and then
Mhm.
edit up the video so that you could see, here's
Yeah.
what DM1 did, here's DM2, and it would be so different, right? And if you play at
Yeah.
organized play, you get to see that. You see like the one DM doing a thing with an adventure you wrote that's
Yeah.
totally different. And then this other one is making it comedic or really leaning into the characterization. This other person's running this amazing tactical angle on it, right? And
Yeah.
yeah.
One of the most interesting experiences is running at a convention and standing next to tables that are running the same adventure on either
Hmm.
side of you. And you'll read box text and you'll get to the end of it, and then the DM next to you will be reading the same box text. So it's like you're synced up.
Yeah.
And you'll do an encounter and and then you'll read the next bit of box text. And almost to the minute that you stopped, they start. And it's like you can tell that especially these experienced game masters, have such a control with their timing
True.
that they can do wildly different things during play, but they've got the cadence down
Yeah.
and they know exactly when they need to hit that next
because they're watching the
limit.
time for
Yeah,
that encounter and they know
exactly.
this should just
Yeah,
last an hour. And yeah. But the things that
yeah,
happen in it can be very different. And it's fun to like
for
walk
sure.
around and look at like if you're ever like organizing a group of DMs, you walk around, you look at if they all use minis,
Mhm.
things will be in totally different places, both
Sure, sure.
enemies and characters. And some
Yeah,
of that is emergent play, but a lot of it is the approach that DM took was a little different, which creates all
yeah.
these ripple effects that are totally different, right?
Yep, absolutely.
One other thing that I'll say here, this could be in the player, tips for players, new players, just as well as tips for new DMs. But there was something that you and I have chatted about in the past that Chris Tulloch did, where he took the fourth edition. I forget if it was the DM's box set, but there was a box set that had an adventure in it that I think is okay. But
Mhm.
he took it and he wrote a DM's how to run this sheet where you just took like the first four rooms from this little dungeon scene
Mhm.
and you broke up what you did in it so that the first room was skills.
Mhm.
So you describe the room and players will make skill checks with their characters.
Mhm.
You as DM are adjudicating what they learn, right? And giving them
Mhm.
information. And when you break it down that way, that becomes a really valuable lesson and way to gain proficiency for both the players and the DMs to handle just like skills right now. Get to
Yep.
the next scene, and there's a role playing thing with, I think, like a talking horse or something like that. So now you're role playing, both you
Yep.
and player are getting some mastery of that. And then there is a, trap or something like that. And then the next room is like a bunch of goblins and it's combat. I forget exactly what. But there's some sort of
Mhm.
combat in there so you can learn the combat mechanics. And that
Yeah.
stepwise progression is really valuable for both player and DM to learn a
Mhm.
game. And more
Yeah.
adventures should try to do that up front with
Mhm.
really kind of clear silos so you gain that mastery.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, Teos, thank you for sharing your player, game master, and designer
Thank
wisdom
you.
with us. And thank you to all of our listeners. For all of our patrons out there, thank you so much. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/mastering D&D, like a bunch of these fine folks here did. We have Master of Dungeon supporters. Thank you for your support. We have Master of Realm supporters, looking at your wonderful names right now. And our Masters of the Multiverse, they get a special shout out. So we're going to go with Agile Monk of Fantasy Campaign Companion Workshops. Keith Hammond of The Monsters Know What They're Doing, Lou Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios, Craig Bailey, Dave Bastiensen, Steve Bissonette, Merrick Blackman, Calvin Bridges of Alos, Robobalin, Kevin Criswell, welcome, Dead Inertia DM, Evil John, Evan at Nimble Co., Will Doyle, Andy Edmonds at nerdronomicon.com, James Fisher, Scott Fitzgerald Gray at Insane Angel Studios, William Harshman of Runeforged Tabletop Gaming, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, Sean Hurst, Hyperlexic, Mark and Mary's Gaming Compound, The Mighty Jerd, JR of The Twilight Perspective, Brian King, Jim Klingler, Chad Lynch, Paul Mata, The Mathemagician, Eric Mengi, Anna B. Meyer of Fantasy Cartography, Trey McLemore, John Mickey, Mighty Zeus, Sean Molly, Falcon Neal, Tom Nelson from the Deck of Player Safety, DT Norris of DT and Dragons, Phil Wirt from Page, the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo, Philip and Lindsay, Frog Prince at Tentacles Squelching Wetly, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Ricardo Who Might Adventure, Robert Pasley, Vladimir Prunner from Croatia, Pugtus, Ozymandias Rex, Runner Rick, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Andy Shockney, Krishna Samosa, Tim Smith, Spark from Dunner Games, Josh and Lee Wanika of the Tabletop Journeys podcast, Talos, the Storm Lord, Jeremy Talaman from D&D and TV podcast, Trace, Joe Tyler, Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM, James Walton, Graham Ward, Jason Ward from Accidental Cyclops Games, Javier Waziak, Chris Webster, Zach Types, and Zilwalt Winfrey. Thank you so much for your support. If you can't help us via our Patreon, we completely understand. You could help us out by going to YouTube and clicking all the subscribe, like, and so on. That helps us out. Or go to wherever you listen to the podcast, including Apple Podcast, and leave us a review. Much appreciated. Much appreciation to you, Teos. So where can people find you and your wonderful work?
Thank you, Shawn. You can find me at alphastream.org. My latest blog was all about the player's handbook, where I talked about why I don't love it overall, which was hard to write and try to not seem disrespectful, but why I have some negative feelings about it, whereas I'd been positive about the other two books. So alphastream.org. Shawn, where do we find you?
On the socials at Shawn Merwin, and you can also follow the podcast at Mastering DND. So we have navigated the tricky waters of learning and teaching new players and DMs. What are we going to do now?
Let's see. Maybe the idea is I'm gonna just go next time I go to the grocery store, set that goal of 5 new DMs.
Very, very good. Excellent choice. I am going to go figure out how to teach new game designers how to design games because
I like it.
class is coming up on me rapidly.
Class is in session.
Uh huh.